do that. So before I introduce Sue and Rachel, because I sort of invited them along because of their wonderful experience, and you have both spent years making the preparations, whereas especially the compost preps, I've only made them 2 or 3 times, and that's always been with somebody else. But I just wanted to show, I'm not sure if people here have this biodynamic growing guide, seeing as how I did most of my learning in Australia. There's a guy who works with Brian Keats called, I never know how to say his name, Stephen Morga or Major, and he has put out with Brian this really good, I'll just sort of open it up and run it past you, so you can just kind of have a little bit of a look. Got a lot of, it's just a really good, concise compilation about biodynamic growing that's got the rhythms of the cosmos and how to make the preparations, the sort of apogee and perigee, the stirring of the preps, how to make the compost preparations, as well as 500 and 501. The difference between Newton's picture of the world and Goethe's picture of the world, waxing, waning moon, etc., etc., etc. But this page here I find particularly helpful, especially if we're going to be talking about hopefully you can see that, about the compost preparations, because it shows which parts of the plants the various compost preparations work with, and they're linked to the planets. So
I must get that.
Yeah, so, and it's only about $20, and then it goes into all the explanations of the preparations, and how to store them, also cow pat pit, etc. And then on this side here, you've got your 501 and your 500. And yeah, the vortexing, just, how to get a really good vortex going. So it's called the Biodynamic Growing Guide. So if you, it'll probably have where you get it from.
Where did you get yours from, Christine? Because I tried to look on Google some months ago and I just couldn't seem to find it.
If you get Brian, it's probably through Brian. I used to sell these at Vortex. Let's have a look and see. Yeah. Arcadia, ARACARIA, Arcaria, Biodynamic Farm Project, or arcaria.com.au.
Okay.
arcariaguides.com. So it's a really good one, because you can take it to workshops, people can have a look at it. If you just want a quick overview, I find it really good in the sense of just remembering things, and that connection, with the parts of the plant and how the cosmic and terrestrial forces work in, and that like Brian's put a lot of the information in there, and the lovely picture that we have our organs like the animals inside of us, the plants have their organs outside of us, and so I just thought that could be a good lead in. And I don't know, Sue, would you like to start maybe just with anything you'd like to share about making any of the preparations? I don't know whether you want to focus on the compost preps or the 500, 501 or whatever. I have my lovely chaps here in my jar with, I just got some lovely 501 from Sue recently, which is, it's interesting how white yours was compared to my my Australian kind of quartz, quite, it's a bit hard to see, but it's quite got a lot of iron in it. And yours is like this interesting white powder.
Yeah.
When I've sent
Was
things
that-
through the
Was
mail,
that
they
pure
haven't.
quartz crystal? So
Sorry?
was it from pure quartz crystal or the quartz crystal down here?
It was pure quartz crystal. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
pointed
made both.
quartz.
I've made it with the local quartz as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, it probably did look a bit more like the color of Christine's one.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering, because the batch I made with Fabiano a few years ago, it was pure pointed quartz crystal, and it was white as white could be. It was really white.
Yeah. I mean, I ran a magnet over the local quartz, and there's quite a lot of heavy metals in there, and that's just the stuff that gets picked up on the magnet. But there's other stuff in there that isn't as pure. That, I mean, there's still that, you know, sort of argument of whether you're using local or bringing in from mined areas, but yeah, I don't know. I think with it being such a you know, pure light force, that maybe we need to accentuate that with the best quality.
The stuff I
Like wine,
stuff
good
I
quality
made-
wine, you can't get past the good quality really. Once you've tasted it, you can't really go back.
The 501 I made 2 years ago was the mortar and pestle. I found was where all the contaminant was coming from. It was breaking down the mortar and pestle, and it was making it really grey.
Yeah, that's why crushing between the two pieces of glass is probably the better way. But starting off in the pestle and mortar or with an iron stomper is quite often the hard bit to keep it uncontaminated. Yeah.
So do you want to start with the 501 so, and just, you know, how you make it, and then I mean, we can either do, you know, how you make it and then, you know, your favorite ones or something like that. And Rachel, if you've got favorite ones that you like to make and so forth, then that could follow one after Sue perhaps. And if anyone wants to ask questions, then just put your hand up and we can, otherwise we'll just listen to you, Sue, if you would like to kick off.
Well, yeah, the 501 is something, the last lot I made was in 2017 with Colin Ross, actually. So the fact that you don't need to make it every year is quite beneficial in a way, because it's one of the more difficult preparations to make, in so much as you're having to pound the quartz down to a fine powder. And now that can be quite a, you know, mesmerizing experience or in itself, just because that whole releasing of energy in a quartz crystal, you actually feel it, you know, and the whole vibrational thing of putting it between two pieces of glass, you know, there's this kind of crushing and breaking down of something so hard. It's quite an amazing thing to be doing. But yeah, we down here, Quartz Reef actually made a stomper. They call it a stomper, so it's a steel crusher that initially crushes the crystals down so that they're in little granules, and then it goes either in the pestle and mortar, as Simon was describing, and even after that between the two plates of glass. And so it's quite a time-consuming exercise, but yeah, it's also very rewarding. And so by the time you've got this beautiful fine powder, you know, you've kind of got this huge, powerful magnifying. If you can imagine, each facet of the quartz crystal has been now broken down into millions or billions and trillions of pieces, and each of them has a light reflecting surface. So you've got this enormous amount of light reflectivity. And then mixing it with spring water or rainwater into a paste, so that it's kind of like a sorbet quality, and pouring it into a clean cow horn. I mean, I actually keep horns separate for that particular process, just because, just feels right to keep the two separate, and it's just, yeah, generally you would only need to fill maybe even one horn, but yeah, we ended up filling about 3, I think. And so leaving them, we put them in sand with the point down, and that way the water settles to the top of the horn, and then you can just pour off the water. And so you've got pretty much all the quartz and it's sunk down into the bottom of the horn, and then that's buried for 6 months over the summer. Yeah, it's quite a beautiful thing to do. When you lift the horn, usually most of the moisture is sort of dissipated, and then you just tap out the powder and keep it in a glass jar in sunlight. So it's not kept with the other preparations in the dark. Actually, you're reinforcing the sun into that powder as well. And the fact that you only need a tiny quantity of it mixed in warm water and stirred for an hour is also, a beautiful thing to do. And the crystals never dissolve. It's not like you're dissolving that crystal. It just sort of levitates in the water. And so when you spray it out as a fine mist in the morning, it's kind of lifting up with the morning breath out of the earth, and then just gently dissipates down. Not dissipates, sorry, but sort of comes down in a really nice fine mist, and will sit on the leaves and the flowers and plants and things. So yeah, it's quite a beautiful preparation to make and to use. Yeah.
You put it in around the spring equinox, but definitely before the summer solstice, so it's under the ground during the solstice.
Yeah.
And then lifting in the autumn. Yeah, so this year I don't make it every year, but I did make it this year. And I put it in, I was a little bit late getting around to it, so it was probably November, and I left it a little bit longer, and it was just about Easter, so I thought, I just left it on Easter Day, so on the Sunday morning of Easter Day, with that sort of rising kind of energy, even though it's our autumn. I lifted it that day. A couple of other people were there, and we lifted. Well, one of my grandchildren, a friend. Yeah. So.
Lovely. Yeah, that kind of resurrection around Easter is a really nice way. I think because I'm from Europe, I struggle with summer and winter. Because of the weather change, is the opposite way around.
Yes, yes, it's very confusing.
Yeah,
that's all good. I just thought we'd get that clarification.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well pointed out. Yeah, so it goes in the ground for the summer, and then it's sprayed on in the morning times during an ascending moon, if possible. And again, that's got that kind of drawing up sort of momentum with it. And some people are using it as an autumn spray in the afternoon to sort of draw up the sugars in vines and things like that after the leaves have fallen off the vines. So that's always another sort of interesting conversation to consider, but generally it's a morning spray and used first thing in the morning before or as the sun's rising, so that the sun is actually filtering through it, but not so strong that it's going to actually burn the leaves and our skin. And with that sort of out breath of the morning where dew's rising and everything's lifting. So yeah, that's a beautiful time to use it. And again, you'd be putting it on in the spring when the soils are warming and the air is starting to warm up, and again in the autumn as a sort of, but yeah, or even right throughout the year. Lots of people are using it in their tunnel houses to sort of keep ripening fruits and keep off it helps also with some of the sort of fungal diseases as well, because it has that sort of drying effect and a contracting effect. So it can sort of draw the the colors and the flavors of fruits and vegetables as well. Yeah, sort of associated with colors. You know, the carrot is very sort of silicic and can benefit from that. Yeah.
And so just the silicic acid, because obviously that's, you know, silica is, I think, isn't it, something like 70%, you know, of the makeup of the minerals on the earth, and so we're quite dependent on it in lots of ways. We need quite a lot of it. But what in terms of how could, you know, encouraging more silicic acid elements in the soil actually help plants? What kinds of things? Is it just to do, as you said, with the color and the form and the pattern and the sugars and the carbohydrates and photosynthesis, or is there, you know, does it have some other activities?
Well, I think it's capturing the light forces and puts those back into the soil. You know, keeping qualities as well. It's sort of associated with lots of beneficial. I'm not so much with the soil. Can you speak to that, Rachel?
I think it works on the leaves, and if you're measuring Brix levels, for instance, you can see quite a rapid rise in Brix after applying the 501. So it's sort of quite a stimulus to sugar production in the leaves, and as such, you know, high sugar in the leaf is always helpful against pests, particularly like sour, low sugar leaves. So yeah, it increases the plant health through that, and also the firming up of the leaf cuticles. But yeah, like the minerals are kind of the earth's eyes to the heavens, and so that connection with the cosmic rhythms and what's happening in the whole cosmos is very strongly kind of channeled through silica. And it's not really a material thing, because, you know, silica is basically inert, and so that's why it's not usually considered among the plant nutrients, because can't be absorbed, can't be metabolized. It just is. And but it's got this extremely important role in being that connection with the whole, well, I'd say the whole environment then, and the cosmic environment as well, via silica. And that Greek word cosmos was their word for order, and so the cosmic ordering forces, the order of the cosmos is, I feel, the 501 preparation, the silica, is what particularly strongly connects with the ordering forces of the cosmos. So the cabbage stands there and it kind of knows it's a cabbage and proud to be a cabbage. And, you know, there's times when you've applied the 501 and you're just kind of rinsing your spray equipment and putting it away, and then you turn around and it's like, oh, the garden, these plants are all looking at you, and it's like they're standing up looking at you. It's you know, it's like they've connected with their cabbage essence or whatever, you know, and they're just pretty strong and bright about it.
And so the important thing is, for those that perhaps haven't used the 501, is that you need to put your 500, your horn manure, out at least 2 or 3 times before you use the 501, because I've had the experience of, in a new garden, you know, having some left over after a workshop and just putting it out and changing the shape, the color and the form of some flowers in a pot. And it took almost 3 years for them to go back to the right color and to the form. And it was almost like, and it was on a camellia bush, it was like the the leaves kind of rolled up and went quite hard and became quite different. It was like they were trying to go to a much stronger form. So, these are the things to just sort of be aware of, that they're not put out lightly, that there is a kind of order as well, that if we want to bring these cosmic forming forces in, we still have to have substance to be able to form. And so that's where, we perhaps think about that. Deborah?
So it's funny on having it on your little phone, all the buttons are different. Yeah. You were just saying about having the 500 3 times prior, at least. How long, like you could be at the end of applying, you applied the 500 and you're up to like nearly 3 months before you're due to do the next 500. Is it better to do it, the silica, closer to when you've done the 500, or at the other end where you're just about to redo it? Does that make sense?
Mm.
And then there's one more question. When we did our last 501, somebody, you weren't here, Rachel, but somebody said about you have to be careful putting it on to seedlings because they'll just bolt. And I had that experience the first time. I think we hadn't had, I need 2 500s down and then lots of the plants, and I didn't know at the time. I'm thinking, God, they're rubbish plants. They've all just bolted, but not knowing it was the silica. But would that, if you have got, so this time when we did it, I actually did it around the property and on the fruit trees, but I was really cautious and didn't actually want to spray it on my garden because I didn't want everything to bolt. So it didn't really get a good dose. So if things are well formed and they're not so much into the seedling stage and you've had the 500 on, it's, how developed do they have to be from the seedling stage to not make them bolt? That was my second question. That's it now.
Mm-hmm. I could answer if you like. What was the first one again?
When do you put the silica on? Is it closer to when you've done the application of the 500, or more a couple of months after? Which end is it better to do it?
I would tend to do it sort of soon after the 500. In fact, some people, and I've done it a few times, do a sequential spray where you do the 500 in the afternoon and then directly the following morning do the 501. So that's one thing. I can't fully kind of verify this, but I know Peter always recommended using the 501 on the moon Saturn opposition, or at least on the 24 hours prior to the time of that moon Saturn opposition, and that the effect of the tendency to bolting was less if it's done at that time. But I mean, if you're doing larger areas of crops, you do look quite closely at the timing, particularly with like a grain crop, doing it at what we call the 4-leaf stage, just little seedlings this high, and then again in the week or two before harvest, just as the wheat is hardening up, the grains are firming up. But and with fruit trees generally too, it's sort of in the young leaf stage as the leaf buds are bursting, and then when the fruit is a week or two before harvest, so that you're not helpful. You're not impeding the development. Yeah,
that's helpful. That gives me the good picture. Thanks, Rachel.
And the second one was?
No, that was both of them.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
Thank you.
So do you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, I've got a desk full of cats. I think, yeah, rather than thinking of the quartz as a substance, it's more of a force.
Yeah.
And I was listening to Dennis Klocek today, and he was saying, you know, the connection between the moon and the sun in the horn, you know, so the inside is calcium, and that's sort of associated with the soil, and the outside is the silica, although the horn is not pure silica. I mean, it's kind of hair and you know, sort of nail
Mm.
fabric. It's not silica because otherwise it would have a crystal sticking out of its head. But you know, the fact that the horn itself has got this silicic outside, and the carbon, I mean the calcium inside, is quite an interesting concept as well, because we're making both the preps in that horn, and you know, the connection with the cow, the temperature the temperature regulating part of her makeup. And then the other thing I've been thinking with the 501 is, you know, how people talk about, you know, you're kind of polishing your garden. It's got this kind of shininess about it, and it's quite a lovely sort of colloidal feel to the water when you've been stirring it, and similar to when you're stirring with the 500, because that becomes quite elastic as well. But you know, that's the magic that happens with stirring for the hour, and sort of bringing that memory into, you know, imprinting it into the water. And so when we think about, yeah, that's a lovely picture there of the vortex that those crystals will be sort of levitating up and down in, and by spraying at them, you know, as soon as you've stirred it, then that they're sort of suspended in that water as well. And you know, we think about quartz is used in computers, so it's got this memory, and you know, in watches and things like that. So it's got this lovely connection to time and imprinting properties into it.
So Sue, in the vineyard, when are the main times? Is that just again, do you do it at sort of bud burst, and then again when the fruit's just coming up towards harvest time?
Yeah, we tend to avoid flowering time, just you know, where the fruit cap is you know, could be affected by anything really. So generally bud burst and around harvest time. Yeah, so it definitely you know, also seems to have a bit of a it can harden the skins a little bit, which can be beneficial, you know, so that you don't get so much rubbing on the vines and things like that. It gives a little bit more of a protective barrier around the fruit. And certainly, yeah, working with the aromas and flavors, I think it's, you know, which is why, you know, the vineyards are the ones that are taking biodynamics sort of really seriously, because that
I could extend on that one, sir, if that's all right.
Yes.
So just talking from experience from what I did at Burn Cottage, we went for a cyclic process of putting on 500 through the spring period, and then your 501 didn't start until after fruit set, or even bunch closure. So through the veraison period, we put 2 to 3 501s on, depending on and it was a cyclic process. It was following Sagittarius, and usually the 500 followed the cyclic process of Taurus each month. And the idea is for using 501 for the grapes is to help advance the flavor production and the seed ripening. And one other use I have dealt with it in the past. This was with Fabiano Frangi when I was at Geeson's. We actually put a 501 in the winter time, and the idea there was with the bud initiation, the primordial initiation in the bud in the winter time. The 501 was put on as a message to help with that process. That was Phoebe's sort of indicator, which was quite a cool sort of different point in time to use it.
Yeah, that feels quite a good time, really, doesn't it? I don't know, just that when it's kind of asleep and sort of outwardly asleep, but very awake inside those buds.
Yeah, interestingly, the year following putting that 501 on in the winter, we had a massive crop. Because that was the idea. It was the grapevine, the chilling of the grapevine bud that's on that cane helps increase the number of berries in the bud, the primordial initiation. And so that was Fabiano's idea of using the 501, was to help send that message to that bud to increase its berry numbers. So yeah, it was
And, what I mean, Marion, knowing that you're growing herbs and so forth, and if you know, when would be an ideal time, do you think, or a good time if you wanted to really enhance the oil, say in, you know, even sort of basic herbs like rosemary or, you know, rose oil, or you were hoping to distill the oil, then would you still put it out at bud burst, or would it be a different time that would enhance that oil production?
I think, can you hear me?
Yeah.
yes,
I think the oil production is higher when it's dry and hot, which would be probably even midsummer or even before. Sorry, I think there is some noise in the room as well. So yeah, I'm not too sure if that would correspond to the 501 yet. I haven't made the connections. But what would you think? Would that be a good time to put this 501? Yeah, when it's the oil as at the most.
plant maturation would be my pick, just to help enhance that oil production.
Was that at maturation? So when it, just before you pick the
Yeah,
limbs,
that would be my view of that one, is when the plant has gone through its vegetative stage and is sort of into that stage of maturement.
Yes, interesting.
Yeah, it's got that contracting force, so you know it would be drawing everything into a point. So yeah, and generally I presume with herbs, you know, they become finer and finer in leaves as they mature, and that would also sort of correspond to the 501 sort of forces, I think.
Any other thoughts? Anybody else? I was just sort of intrigued because you know, I have another friend who's, you know, trying to sort of make her own remedies and so forth, and she's hasn't done much with biodynamics, but it was also a question of, you know, the best time to use it, because obviously it depends on what you're growing. And as Deborah said, you know, I've had that experience too with leafy and flowery vegetables going to seed really quickly, and even herbs like thyme or rosemary, you know, sort of not even setting seeds, just doing a quick flowering and then going to a kind of seeding phase, and then yeah, not doing their best sort of thing. So it's, you know, there's never one answer for these things. I think we have to kind of really work with the bigger picture. And as you say, so and Rachel, you've said it too, this is a cosmic force we're working with. It's very different to the 500 in that sense of a very shall we say, mineral solid soil like substance of the cow manure. It's very refined particles, you know, that are fully full of life and warmth and are difficult for us to see, but you can certainly experience it when you're walking around putting it out, you know, and that sense of almost being lifted out of yourself. I've had an experience in Australia with a friend of mine who wanted to experience this. He was a homeopath, and I always used to say, you know, we need food and we need cups of tea when we're stirring 501, because you will excarnate early in the morning. And he said, oh, I want to see what happens. Anyway, so he didn't have any cups of tea and muffins. And at lunchtime, he rang me and he was literally giggling on the phone. And I said, are you all right? And he was giggling and laughing and carrying on. And he said, you won't believe this. I was walking along the wall. For some reason, I thought it was a good idea to walk along my wall. And I fell off. I felt so light. And he had this experience of really sort of going into this whole, you know, airy sort of realm. You know, he liked to explore those sorts of things. And that just, you know, it made me laugh in that sense that he wanted to experience what the 501 did to him. And so he hadn't eaten anything. He fasted until that time. So there's a funny experience, a funny little story of, you know, very different to the 500 that brings us in. And so I'm conscious of time. And I know, Caitlin, you really wanted to talk about compost prep. So perhaps people are a bit more familiar with the 500. So could we move into looking at the compost preparations, unless there's any more kind of thoughts or questions about 501? So Caitlin, have you got a particular question, or what is it you'd like to know more about? Is it what they do to the plants? Is it how they're used? The connection to the planets? What sort of questions have you got sort of about the compost preps?
My questions are what they do to the plants. I think that's a great question. And I remember Katrina talking one time about how they kind of are connected with the different parts of the body, like kind of give that element to the compost. So I'm also intrigued by that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they're powerful herbs. Some people would call them weeds, but you know, they're beneficial in lots of ways, as well as in the preparation. They bring up minerals in your garden, and the medicinal plants. And I think you know, the fact that they go through a transformative stage in different sheaths, you know, brings about a concentration. It's kind of combining the four kingdoms, which is, you know, the mineral, the plant, water, the mineral, which is like our earthly forces, and then the plant kingdom, which is the watery forces, and then the flower, the air, light kingdoms, and the seed, which is the sort of fire, warmth signs. And yeah, I think that the fact that Rudolf Steiner sort of brought together
Like
yeah, you get computer envy. Yeah, what these animal parts in you know, in combining with the plants is a fascinating way of understanding homeopathy. You know, they didn't sort of just bring any old random things together. There's a science behind why each of the flowers goes into the different sheaths of, but it's, you know, combining these four kingdoms. So you're bringing the mineral, the plant, and the animal kingdoms in together, and it's the fourth kingdom is the human, and that's the one that can actually do those things and bring the alchemy into play, if you like, because, you know, otherwise it just wouldn't happen. You wouldn't get dandelions in mesentery in the ground. So you know, that part of it is lovely, and making the preparation, I mean, even using the preparations brings you into, you know, this whole new relationship and consciousness with the plants. And so I suppose essentially, you know, your first question is, what does it do to the plants? And I think the preparations enhance the soil microbes, they balance out the breakdown of the compost, and they do kind of work as like a set of organs, which organize breakdown, but they're kind of regulating what happens in the compost. They regulate the amount of nitrogen that is released and so that you don't lose it all into the atmosphere. And they metabolize help metabolize the breakdown of the organic matter. So yeah, so and in doing so, it's going to be increasing the beneficial bacteria in our soil and strengthening the plants so that they have a much more resilience to pests and disease, and much more vitality in the nutritious side of things. Yes, also working in with the seasons. Some of the compost preparations take 6 months, others take a full year, and quite often we think about the summer and the winter as these two polarities. The stinging nettle takes a whole year for the breakdown because it's one of the plants that's considered so powerful and so strong that it takes the whole year's worth of seasons to actually break it down. But also the yarrow takes a full year if you consider that you're hanging the bladder, the yarrow flowers in the bladder throughout the spring and summer, so you're getting the summer forces, and then you bury it in the autumn, and so you're having the two polarities working on that particular preparation. I'm kind of jumping around here. Maybe we should start at the beginning with the 502. I mean, the fact that the flowers as well, Stuart Lundy mentions this. We use these medicinal herbs with flowers, the essence of flowers, and for essential oils and aromatherapies, and herbs that we can heal our bodies with. But we don't often put flowers in the compost. You don't go and pick a bunch of flowers and lay them on as a layer in your compost, but by concentrating them, that's how we're actually using the power of flowers, getting it back out onto the land. So I mean, you can put yarrow in your compost, loads of it if you've got big amounts of it, and you can certainly put dandelions in there as well, but these are the concentrates that we can actually make into these tiny alchemical preparations, I like to call them, just so that they're almost inoculants, just tiny amounts, homeopathic sort of quantities are needed. Instead of a whole ton of flowers, we can actually concentrate those medicinal and powerful concentrates together. So yeah, the 502 being the yarrow preparation. So it's the flowers that are collected, and yarrow is one of the only plants that draws up sulfur from the soil. So it's kind of mining sulfur, and it draws it right up to the highest point of the plant, which is the flower. And if you look at the sort of the architecture or the gesture of the plant, that you've got these flowers on stems that are on a very thin squared stem. The leaves are kind of these soft frilly, what are quite often known as Venus eyebrows, and of course the flower is connected to Venus, and then these kind of stages of growth and spurts of growth, and then right up to this amazing spread of flowers at the top, and there's this kind of order where they all flower at the same kind of dimension at the top there. Tiny white flowers, 5-star, I think. Do you know, Rachel? I think they're 5-star.
Well, they're daisies. It's actually a whole head of little daisies, really.
That's right.
Close up there, they are the composite. Yeah.
And yeah, and then the connection to the stag's bladder, which they're placed into the stag's bladder to hang in the tree and then to go into the ground. But the stag has also got these antlers that are very much the same shape as the plant. And so that's sort of signature, if you like, of the connecting the animal, which and the stag, of course, quite different to a cow, is quite a nervous creature and very much cosmic. And when you think about shamans, they would wear the antlers on their heads, it would be their badge of honor to say that they were part of, they could see into higher realms or the cosmic sort of forces that the magicians had powers with. So the stag is a very sort of cosmic creature. The bladder has holding in forces of water, it's holding in the liquid and also expelling toxins, and so it's this really a beautiful sort of almost earth-shaped sheath, and yeah, it's got so many properties. So the flowers are put into the bladder. The bladders can be collected and blown up like a balloon and then dried for processing later, because you don't always get the bladders at the right time for making the prep. So but they're quite a beautiful thing to feel, very high in silica. And then you've got this whole the outer force of the flower. That's the most outward part of the flower and the most inward part of the stag. So these two polarities that we work with in preparation making and biodynamics generally. And then so the 502 is sort of potassium and copper and sulfur. Yeah, so it's drawing up sulfur, but it's got also some sort of properties towards copper, from my knowledge, from what I can remember. Anything you can add to that, Rachel?
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah. Well, copper is the metal of Venus, isn't it? Yeah, and the potassium and the stem, like even when yarrow flowers die, the stalks stay standing there, for months. Really, it's a very woody stem, so that the way they work with potassium is very, very good. And so all the preparations, they're kind of bringing processes, aren't they? They sort of highlight processes. So rather than not so much bringing in big amounts of potassium or sulfur, it's that the potassium process or the sulfur process are facilitated, really. Yeah, so those things can function in a proper way, and also possibly even in I guess maybe where you might say almost the magic of biodynamics is that there's so much can happen in a living cell on living membranes that doesn't happen in test tubes, or where you're, if you're testing something or looking under microscope at things, you destroy the life processes. And Rudolf Steiner does talk about the transmutation of elements, even. So something that science denies, or at least doesn't seem to happen easily in a test tube chemistry situation, but living cells can do all these things that science says aren't really possible. So that potential for process. I mean, he says that if the plant doesn't find the substance around in the soil, it kind of can generate a number of these things. Yeah, and
There's
processes.
quite a nice little overview here. I mean, you've covered an awful lot, but just if I'll just read this little bit as well. This preparation has strong radiating powers. It refreshes and quickens the soil by harnessing the distant cosmic substances that come to the earth in homeopathic quantities, such as silicic acid and lead. 502 stimulates potassium and bacteria and helps combine sulfur and other substances. Promotes fruiting and strengthens the plant against insect attack. Yarrow helps to condense sunlight further from sugar sap to starch through the catalyst acting properties of potassium. The earth fire sulfur works strongly in this plant too. And neither of you have mentioned yet, but you stuff the flowers into the stag's bladder and hang it in a sunny position over the summer, and then it's buried in autumn for the duration of winter, and that's buried in the ground. Is that right? I remember that rightly. You have a pit, a special pit.
Mm-hmm. Where were you reading that from, Christine?
That's from the, the Biodynamic Growing Guide. Yeah.
Mm.
So, it doesn't have everything, but that's sort of quite a good summary that maybe pulls what you've both said there together. So shall we go to 503?
Move on.
Yep. Yeah. So once again, chamomile, the chamomile flower is used in medicinal purposes for our human bodies, for gut and digestive medicine, and so bringing the chamomile flower into a cow intestine. The intestine again is the inner part of the cow, and the flower is this outer property. The planet that the plant is connected to is Mercury, and so chamomile has that mercurial sort of movement. The way its architecture is quite light and it sort of moves around the garden, actually, doesn't it, Rachel? Never wants to grow where you plant it. It just ends up in the pavement cracks or down at the end of the garden somewhere. But it's got this kind of mercurial movement to it, and so is the intestine, this lovely spiraling flow. And I don't know if you saw the photograph that I posted up recently of my intestine that I was drying out, and it's just got this sparkling glow to it. It's this lovely silica shine on it, and and then of course the intestine breaks down and digests everything, and the flower, the chamomile flower, when you're actually putting it into the cow intestine, the sort of putrid smell of intestine or inside of the animal is then just becomes beautiful. All you can smell is the chamomile. And it has this calming sedative effect as well for us and for the soil. So we can also use chamomile as a spray in its own right. For if we've had crazy winds or frost or anything like that, you can spray your garden with a chamomile tea. And I quite often use chamomile tea bags. If you can get some organic ones, that's always good. Or make it, just make up a pot of tea and then spray it over the garden. It has this nice calming sedative effect, because you can imagine if you're like tense from a storm or from cold, and then the flowers and the plants just seem to relax. So that's quite a nice preparation, to use on its own as a spray. But yeah, and that's moderating. So as Rachel said, the flowers we're not adding flowers to the compost as such, but but they activate and regulate and stimulate what is happening in the breakdown of the compost, especially. And then of course the compost that we've put the preparations in becomes the carrier of all of their strength. And as Katrina might have mentioned, that they are kind of like a set of organs. Like we have our heart, liver, lung, and everything works together as a set. And so the preparations work as a set as well, and they sort of organize the breakdown and put beneficial bacteria into as an addition into cowpat pits or liquid manures, where you put that set. And yeah, so chamomile is the chamomile preparation is moderating calcium, sulfur, and nitrogen and potassium. But yeah, it's not bringing that particularly in. It's just activating what's already there. It's a bit like acupuncture in a way, you know. So we've already got what we need. We just need to stimulate it into unlocking in our soils.
Yeah.
You want to add anything, Rachel?
No, you said about Mercury, and yeah, Mercury is that fleet-footed messenger of the Greeks. A very, it's like it's just popped into the evening sky in the last few days, but you know, you see it maybe a few more times and then it's gone again, and you don't see it for quite a while. It's fairly close to the sun, so it only sort of pops out for a short time as an evening star or morning star, and it's that yeah, so it's very much that, you know, moving about equality, and yeah, being in touch with all sorts. Yeah, I sort of think that the chamomile growing, it always seems to me it's happiest if it's growing through another plant, and you know, it's quite often seems to, it comes up in the winter, so peas, it'll be growing up along with the peas or something, and it seems to be much happier growing through other plants than just being in a row of chamomile by itself. Yeah. Yeah, so just sort of getting about into all sorts of places is that quality of Mercury and chamomile. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
well,
interesting one.
Oh, sorry, go Simon.
The interesting one for me, I've always struggled is identifying the German chamomile. Like in the vineyard where I am at the moment, up on one of our terraces. We have a flower that looks very much like chamomile, but I'm pretty sure it's what they call false Mayflower.
Stinking
and that's always,
mayweed.
yeah.
Yeah, if you rub it, the leaves or the flower, it's very smelly, and you wouldn't want to make a cup of chamomile tea with it.
Okay, I haven't actually smelled it. I've only opened the flower up to see if it had the hollow cone or not, but could never really distinguish whether it was hollow coned or not.
Yeah, it is
or whether
nice.
it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I hadn't actually smelled it. Thanks for that.
Yeah, that's the or bite into a flower if it's absolutely yuck. It's the wrong one.
No, I think I'll avoid that one. Anyway, no, that's cool.
You got a question, Deborah?
No, I just wanted to add that I think I remember right that the chamomile helps with the hormone, like a natural hormone for plants, like when they're growing, when they're first starting. It's like a hormone stimulant, I've read. Yeah, and the first part of when the plant, you know how some people add artificial type things when they're trying to get plants started off. Well, that's where the chamomile also comes in. Yeah. So there we go.
So it says here, I'll read these little extra bits out. So if you're taking notes, so the 503 helps to retain nitrogen, calcium and sulfur, and through the calcium and sulfur activates the nitrogen for essential protein development. Nitrogen forces are also kept contained. It also stimulates manganese and boron, as well as activity of soil-dwelling bacteria. It has a broad medicinal tradition as a carminative and anti-flatulent, and it is a digestive aid for humanity and soil processes. And so when you make it, because you obviously have to collect the flowers sometimes at a different time, So pick young flowers in the morning after the sun has dried the dew. Dry gently in indirect sunlight and store until autumn in a brown paper bag in an airy, dark place. Then you create the little sausages in the casing by stuffing flowers into fresh cow intestines. Place tied off sausages into a terracotta flower pot and bury in topsoil and lift in spring. So if you want to have a go trying to make some of these instead of just buying them conveniently through the BD Association already made by people like Sue and maybe Simon and Rachel and others, then yeah, that one's maybe slightly easier. I mean, you can just go to the butcher and ask for a little bit of intestine. I've done that before. If you've got a home kill guy or whatever around, but harder if can't go to freezer roots anymore.
Can I just add to that, Christine? I heard on through the agriculture course podcast that the reason why the intestine is used for the chamomile is because that is the part of the stomach that the chamomile works on, between the digestive and the flatulence, and that's why it's used. That's why Rita put the chamomile into the intestine, because that's the part that activates in the
well,
human body.
That would make sense, because, you know, we have to remember when Steiner came up with all of these things back in the sort of 1920s, there were no sort of home kill, you know, freezing works, you know, plant centers, chemical fertilizers. And so he was on the farm looking at what was already growing there. And you have all these things like your yarrow and your dandelion and your oak bark and your nettles and whatever else I've forgotten, stinging nettle, you know, they're already on tap. And then if people have got animals, and then most farmers used to kill their own animals. And so you had all those parts readily available. And I think, you know, Rachel, we've had this conversation before that, you know, people have tried to find other containers, shall we say, or ways to actually make these preparations, but you know that there's a reason that this symbiosis is there. You know, it all makes sense when you, like you said, Simon, you know, this is the part of the body where, you know, the digestive processes need to be, you know, sort of calmed or dealt with, you know, and yeah, so that's, you know, it's just something to bear in mind, because some people go, oh, this is all a bit odd, but you know, there is logic behind it as well.
Personally, when I heard that myself, it was a bit of an eye-opener to the realization of the deeper understanding of the reason why.
Yeah. Shall we move on to 504, to the stinging nettle?
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about that, Rachel?
Okay. Stinging nettle. Well, it's the German or European English stinging nettle, so it's bigger than the
perennial.
Yeah, it's bigger than the one that commonly grows around where the sheep rest under the pine trees, sort of one. And so it's quite a good volume of material. You're picking it when it's just started flowering. I sometimes do actually pick it a little before the flowers come, just because it's nice and soft and before the insects start eating it. And the stems, you know, nettle stems are very fibrous, and so even after a year, you've got those fibrous stems still in it. So the slightly younger nettle, or not waiting till the end of the season anyway, that gives you get less fibre in your final preparation. This one doesn't, the nettle isn't put into any animal organ. It's just placed in the ground, but for ease of refinding it, you usually, well, I most often use an unglazed flower pot, or unglazed drainage tiles to put the stinging nettle into. But you can, in the agriculture course, Rudolf Steiner says about putting a layer of peat, I think, and then putting your nettle in, and then another layer of peat. But just something so that you can refine your preparation there. So stinging nettle it's well known as a tonic for iron in the blood, to stimulate your iron. And the preparation, when it's broken down, is very black. It's sort of almost bluey black. I grew up in Moginie, and the iron sands on the beach were very much that bluey black colour, and it reminds me of that. It's so black, but a beautiful softness to it. So that's helping with the iron and magnesium processes in the leaves of the plants, and also in the soil. Rudolf Steiner says it makes the soil intelligent. Yeah, that's one of those statements that's there. Yeah, so it's connected with Mars, the energy of Mars, and iron is to do as Mars, so that strength of iron and strong will and iron in the blood. For anemia, a nettle soup is a good one. Yes, any other comments about that one? Let's see. Anything more about it?
An interesting one on that, Rachel. Where's your
Mm.
thoughts around? So when I made it previously, I was indicated just to use the leaves, but then I've made it at another place, and it was the whole plant, which I feel is the right way. But yeah, do you have any?
I mean, because you take quite a volume of it, you've basically got your long gloves or sleeves on or whatever, and you're just picking big bits, and I'm just cutting it off with actually my silky saw, which is so sharp, and I just sort of cut big armfuls of it, and
Yep.
then spread it all out and dry it like hay on my sort of wooden patio, and turn it
Yeah.
over during the day and get it nice and dry to save it for the autumn. Yeah, so it's all the above ground part of the plant. Yeah, I don't take the leaves off the stems or anything. The whole of it goes in.
I've done it before where I was indicated to use just the leaves. So, and these are just
Yeah.
packed into the pot.
Yeah, I guess you'd be able to compress it a little bit more if you took that, but it'd take an awful long time to make any quantity. And it's kind of, if the nettle's growing there, it's relatively easy to make a big volume of it. It's the one that's the easiest one to get and the volume of. So, and then you can just use your sieve and sieve the fibrous stems out afterwards. Yeah,
That's great. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think as opposed to sort of the flower that radiates out, which the other preps, they're more flower preps, flowers radiating out, and the plant, the nettle is kind of drawing in. The stem and the leaves are much more sort of gathering the energy inward rather than outward, perhaps. And so I think the stem, is that concentrate of energy as well. So yeah, usually I find that it kind of almost aerates it as well, because I've made it before with just leaves, and it can go a little bit sort of wet underground.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm. Yeah.
So I'll read this here. He says leaves buried in the earth, but I agree. I find using the stems helpful as well. So Mars unblocks the energy flow, enabling stage-to-stage development. The 504 brings in intelligence to the iron radiations, because it because it conveys intelligence to the soil. It helps proper decomposition, aids chlorophyll formation, and stimulates iron, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and bacterial activity in the soil. It contains formic acid, usually only associated with stings from the insect kingdom, and an appropriate balance of iron essential for photosynthesis. So harvest the plants just before flowering. Leaves with stalk are dried and stored until autumn, then placed without an animal sheath in an unglazed earthenware pot, buried in healthy soil and left for a whole year. After lifting the 504 sieve before storing. So I remember Lynette used to say, you know, that stings wake us up when we get stung by any insect. It helps to wake our astrality up, and in a way the stinging nettle is the closest in the plant realm to a sort of moving towards like the animal soul astral activity, which perhaps has something to do with that intelligence kind of thing, you know, that there's a different sensing to the more etheric forces of some of the other preps. Yeah. Shall we move on to 5? Oh, what are we up to? 5, oak bark.
Yeah, I'd quite like to talk on
That
that one.
Oh.
Yeah, so this one is made with the with oak bark put into the skull of a I've used sheep, goats, or cow skulls, and I've always used a freshly killed skull, and then taken the brain out of the brain cavity, and then filled it with the grated oak bark, which in the oak bark is collected, you know, within ready just at that time for putting in. And this one, I think there's quite a process there with the formation of bark. There's this cambium layer under the bark from which the bark is formed. And that's a layer of soft dividing cells, a bit like stem cells, you might say, that are unspecialized cells. And then to the inside, it forms the xylem, or the water carrying cells, and to the outside, the phloem, and then the bark outside. And the cells that are formed from these very alive dividing cells, they get the cell walls formed, but then it becomes a thicker layer, and lignin and so on, and the cell contents are totally dead by the time you see bark. It's so the calcium is very much part of the cell wall formation and the hardness of bark. And so you've got calcium that's laid down through a living process. Is a very living process, and then you get this sort of dead, virtually a shadow, or something that's formed through a life process. And the bark of each different sort of tree is very recognizable, even though it's totally dead. So it's kind of, you're left with the dead imprint of a spiritual activity, or a growth activity, a life activity. And so the calcium has come through that, and calcium sort of is part of drawing it into this dead process, because during cell wall formation, there's sort of carbon substances that are cemented together with calcium, a bit like when you're making roads, you put the calcium, the lime on to firm up everything, sort of cements things together. So likewise in the cell wall, it's like there's this sort of pectin jelly stuff that's firmed up with calcium. And likewise, a similar sort of process in the brain happens with our thinking, that the thoughts are sort of already formed, but our brain is what picks them up out of the wide thought realm and brings them into almost a dead form, which our material brain and intellect can understand and hold on to. And so and Rudolf Steiner talks several places about living thoughts, or the thoughts being out there, but our brains kind of pick it up and bring it into this hardened and in a way sort of relatively dead form of thought. And so this process that's going on in the brain is this, again, taking something living and making a much less living or dead imprint, a very true imprint from which we can see the quality of the bigger thing. But yeah, this very much a condensing process to do with the calcium. And so he says about this preparation that it's kind of a general disease control, and disease comes about usually when there's like that early springtime, when there's just very rapid growth of this sort of etheric but soft green leafy growth, and to contain that, it's we kind of need these calcium forces to be pulling, forming those cell walls and holding the plant in check more, so that it's not so much soft leafy, soft moist growth that's so vulnerable to fungus and insect attack. So this very much this kind of firming up process that calcium is very much there, and it relates to the quality of the moon, because again, the moon is like this, the light of the sun reflects off the surface, and we get this the reflected light of the sun from the moon, and so it's again, it's a sort of a condensing or a deadened. The life of this that's there in the sun is lost, or reduced, but we get a reflection of it, and so it's sort of a more condensed material form of something.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a lovely picture, because I mean, I've always wondered, the connection with the moon, and and here as well, it has this connection with the roots, and that sort of slight hardening or forming or holding.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, rather than it being more to do with the sort of, well, maybe it's also probably to do with lots of other things, but just that sort of ability to sort of really grasp something and almost complete it. But as you say, it's like an image of something, it's not the actual substance of the sun.
Yes.
Do you want to add anything, Sue, to that, or?
No, that was lovely. Thanks, Rachel. I enjoyed that description. I was just think I usually describe it as these peripheral forces. The oak bark is the furthest out of the tree, surrounding it as a protective layer, and then the inside of the brain cavity of the skull, it's protecting this really important piece of organ, and it's kind of like this calcium castle around this tiny soft bit in the middle, and so I really like that picture of the inner and outer again. But the calcium forces of the oak tree going into this sort of silica, the actual brain cavity has got a silica lining as well. yeah, it's just quite I just love that preparation, making it. I mean, it seems like probably one of the goriest ones, but yeah, it makes so much sense because it's, you know, it's actually concentrating the intelligence again, you know, in this consciousness.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you
Nice.
get the brain out of the cavity?
I've got an amazing stick thing that goes onto my hose, and we've got high pressure water here, so it's like a fine long stick that you probably water high hanging baskets or something with, but it's
I got you. Yeah, I've just
it goes quite easily into the cavity,
Yeah.
the
so
back
it
of,
blows the brains out that way.
and actually
Yeah.
even to
Thanks,
see them,
Simon.
they kind of almost
Sorry.
resemble intestines, actually, the brain, you know, it's
Yeah.
just these shells of
Yeah,
white, amazing.
That's cool. That's
Mhm.
cool because now I've used a garden hose without any end on it and just got it in there to put some pressure in there. Because one thing that was described to me by Shane was to make sure that you keep the integrity of the membrane that's the brain housing
Yeah,
and don't break that down.
yeah.
Nice. Well, I'll read this bit because and I have to keep us moving on. Okay, so balancing calcium growth, fertility, and the moon forces. 505, the oak tree brings mineral calcium strongly into the living realm. Calcium being essential for bringing bulk and fertility into plants, holds in the life forces, for example, oaking of wine, tanning, and in the 505 preparation, calcium growth, fertility, and moon forces are brought together. It is a useful prophylactic against times of excessive growth forces, such as fungal attacks. And we've already talked about how you make it. It says collect a small amount of oak bark, chop until it has a crumb-like consistency, put it into the brain cavity of sheep, goat, or cow skull in autumn. Once again, place in the watery, rotting environment, lift in spring and dry in shaded glass jars until the smell has gone. So there we go, if you want to have a bash at that. So let's go to dandelion 506. So do you want to say something about dandelion? Rachel, do you want to do dandelion?
Sue, you do this one, Crips.
Well, yeah, you've probably heard me say I love that, the idea that the dandelion is like the sun and the moon and the stars. So, you know, we've got this bright yellow explosion, so it's radiating out of the sunshine, and then as it turns into the dandelion clock, you know, it's like the full moon, this lovely white ball sphere, and then each of the tiny little seeds on the edge of that, you know, radiate out as stars. So for me, it's quite a beautiful connection with nature and all that, you know, sort of creates the growth. So the dandelion is connected to Jupiter, and rich in iron, phosphorus, and silicon, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. And again, it's, you know, regulating those things, but I mean, it's also really highly nutritious for us. We can, you know, eat the leaves in salads, and I think even the flowers, make lovely tea. Vitamins A, B, probably all the vitamins actually. And it's got that lovely deep taproot, so it's great to have in your garden because it's aerating and sort of drawing up nutrient, but also opening up the soils. And so one of the more beneficial weeds, if you want to call them that. And so yeah, you're harvesting the flowers, and you know, the dandelion is a clock, so it's quite specific the times that you need to actually harvest the flowers. If they've started opening up too far, then they'll just continue on that journey and become this ball of fluff even when they're dried. So you need to sort of collect them when they're still in a like a spiral for whirl, and then dry them. Make sure that they get lots of airing as you're drying them, because they can also, you know, they hold a lot of moisture and they can quite easily become quite moldy or mildew inside. And then the dried flowers are then moistened and put into a cow mesentery. So the mesentery of the cow is the sheath that holds the 4 stomachs in of the cow. So again, it's got these holding in forces of the delicate interior of the cow, and stops all the stomach rolling around when it runs. And it's, yeah, this very tough but fine silicious sort of sheath, and you make a parcel with the flowers inside it. You can either sew it up. I usually tie mine with string, and that then is put into the soil over the autumn and the winter for 6 months. And again, sometimes I've hung that in, I've made it earlier and hung it in the tree so that it's had some summer forces and some winter forces. I quite like the idea of using the flowers when they've just wilted, which is, you know, what Steiner suggests in the agriculture course. So you know, which would mean if you're going to do it that way, then yeah, you can get to hang it in the tree as well. And I kind of like the idea of having it half cooked in the sun and then finished off in the clay oven of the earth. Yeah, it's great for breaking up compacted soils, as I say, as a plant, and as a medicine. It lowers blood pressure, and it's good for gout and eczema and stiff joints and all kinds of things. So it's an all-round good sort of plant. And yeah, I think I mentioned that it's obviously rich in iron and phosphorus and potassium. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Rachel.
Well, it's connected with Jupiter, and Jupiter is the kind of all-knowing, the kind of kingly all-knowing quality. And I think the sort of interconnectedness of the soil, or a sort of knowingness of the soil. And when it was just as he's about to start talking about that preparation, that's where Rudolf Steiner says, you know, if we fertilize like this, the plants will get what they need, not just from the soil around their roots, but from the neighboring field and even the neighboring forest. And, you know, he didn't mention mycorrhizal fungi by name because they probably didn't have a name quite at that stage. Although I think, you know, Sir Albert Howard was already talking about mycorrhizal fungi, at least by the 1930s or 40s. He says a lot about it in his book from the 1940s. And yeah, but Sir Albert Howard did tests on a number of different, whole range of plants. And he said in his test, the dandelion was the roots, was what had the most mycorrhizal fungi attached to them. So, and I thought, well, that's interesting that, you know, that this was the plant that's got this Jupiter sort of knowing and coordinating kind of everything that's going on in the soil. And it's this one that's got the most mycorrhizal activity around it too. All plants do have some, except apparently silver beet, and that some of that family don't have mycorrhizal fungi attached to their roots. I'm sure they have other ways of connecting with the the micro realm in the soil.
And that's interesting because, you know, it connects, I mean, Jupiter connects with our liver, and you think how hard our liver has to work with sort of detoxing everything and, you know, and dealing with
balancing everything.
Balancing out. Yeah, that it's probably, well, you can't say any organ's more important than another, but it's certainly, and certainly when you go through menopause, you need a good liver. I'll read what it's got here. So plant agent for Jupiter to work through 506, because Jupiter, which has an ancient association with light-filled wisdom, works strongly through dandelion blossoms, packed, got the wrong glasses on here, packed in a cow's mesentery, They enhance the plant's ability to absorb light through the photosynthesis process, allowing the plant to feel and to feed on atmospheric nutrients. Silica is one of the agents that make this possible. And yeah, to make it, pick new flowers early in the morning when they are no more than half open, dry in a brown paper bag in an airy, dark place. Fold the dried flowers into a fat-free mesentery animal membrane that supports intestines. Tie the mesentery package with string. Bury in autumn during descending moon phase, and lift and dry in spring. I like that that idea, so of actually collecting them and having some of those sort of summer forces, because I've kind of wondered that as well, being here on the other side of the world, just kind of balance what they do in their autumn and what we do in our autumn versus spring and so forth. So it is a question, isn't it? So let's move on to 507, valerian. Rachel, do you want to speak about valerian?
Yeah, well, that's if we just speak about what Rudolf Steiner said about it, it's right at the very end of the chapter. He says, and if you've got time to do one more thing, you squeeze some fresh valerian flowers and sprinkle it lightly over your compost. And it helps phosphorus work in the right way. Yeah, so we had to do, you need to kind of think about that a little bit and live with the valerian and do it. And yeah, but I mean, I love the smell of those flowers, and it's the easiest one to make, and that you pick your fresh flowers and bruise them, cover it with water, let it do a bit of a fermenting into a sort of flower vinegar for a week or 10 days till it stops bubbling, and then strain off the solid material and put the liquid into bottles filled right to the top with the lid closed. And it seems to, well, I've had the odd bottle opened after 10 years and it smells as good as the day it was made. So it's pretty nice stuff. So helping phosphorus in the right way. So yeah, well, phosphorus is the light bearer and very much a part of the photosynthesis process, and connected with Saturn, which is the outermost of the visible planets, and kind of in a way kind of contains the solar system and is like the skin between the inner and the outer. Beyond Saturn, well, there are a few non-visible planets, but then it's kind of the whole starry heavens is beyond that. So this, Saturn's always to do with a boundary and a skin. And so this preparation, the liquid, you take a teaspoon or so and stir it in a quarter of a bucket of water and sprinkle that right over your compost heap, making this sort of skin that kind of holds it in, but it's a sensitive skin that it's very much sensitive to the inside outside, and so in that
good for fungal things, good for fungal activity, not so much.
I'm not sure that it's so much. It's I mean, I always use the whole lot as a family of preparations anyway. So sometimes people use valerian by itself on an afternoon where it's obviously going to be a frosty night, and things like avocados, if you want to keep during pollination time, you want to keep the temperature up to about 14 degrees. And so if you spray around the orchard with the valerian in the late afternoon, it can help it not to get so cold as it might have. Yeah, heard of it being used that way. Haven't grown
it warms up the sap of the plant. So it obviously gets the sap moving or something like that through its warmth processes that it's linked to the blood system and everything. And it warms up the sap slightly enough to prevent isolation, isonucleation in the plant. But my description that's been told to me how it works with all the other preparations in your compost heap is that it acts as the connecting, is the blood pathway or the connector between all the other preparations.
Oh, yes,
It's the
yes.
pipeline between the messenger between all the other preparations through the vitality of the heap. That was described to me.
You want to add anything, Sue?
Just that I like to think of it as a blanket of warmth over the compost. It's kind of holding in the warmth, but yeah, as Rachel said, it works on the outside and the inside. And just the gesture of the plant, you know, you have this really, it's actually a spiraling stem, and then the flowers come off at intervals, and there's kind of these gaps in between the flowers, and which you can associate with the rings around Saturn. You know, there's kind of this gap space for potential, which, you know, it's a bit like the vortex. There's some kind of gap there that something can come into. And it's quite interesting in medicinal ways. You know, it's a sedative and a stimulant. It can work both ways. So it's got the polar opposites, and it treats both conditions in a way. So it calms the nervous system, but it can also stimulate and but also reduces blood pressure. So yeah, that's something that, you know, as Simon just mentioned, the blood of the connection.
Yeah, and then our Saturn's to do with the forming of our skeleton of bones. So that's, you know, that's interesting because the bones are hollow, you know, you have the marrow and the nerves go through that, and yet you have this sort of beautiful polished, you know, structure that holds us up, you know, that has things around it in terms of all our fascia and skin and, you know, blood vessels and blah blahs and everything. But then you've got this hollow sort of space inside as well. And if you know, snap a bone and you look at it, it's quite fascinating to realize that it's hollow and yet, you know, carries all the weight around that we that we have in our skull. And you know, once again, like the skeleton of animals and the skulls of animals, how much bony substance we have in our constitution as a human being, I suppose, and an animal being. So yeah. So I'll just I'll read this. Saturn, being the outermost visible planet, provides an ethereal membrane or skin for the solar system. The Valerian provides a subtle blanket of warmth that assists plants to interface with the universe. It also forms a warmth blanket around the compost heap. In plant life, the Saturn-Valerian connection provides a biological sheath, enhancing the subtle energy fields of plants. And you make it, you grind the flowers in a mortar and pestle, dilute with rainwater in a ratio of 1:4, place in a loose lidded glass jar and leave in sunlight for a week before straining, and put a spoonful of this final solution into a bucket of rainwater and vortex for 20 minutes. So there's a few slightly different ways of making it. Yeah, that you know, people find their way to go with. We've got 508, which we'll just mention. It's equisetum, and so that's really strong silica properties. Do you want to just mention the 508? Because that's, you know, this is quite a long time. We're coming up for 2 hours that we've been listening to this. But lots of information, and it will be made available on the website anyway, so that Laura's trying to put these up there so people can go. You know, you're not going to remember all of this in one session. It takes quite a long time. But yeah, who would like to speak about the Equisetum 508?
Well, I have it. Going to say I have it growing. Then I thought, well, I shouldn't say I have it growing.
You know where it grows.
Yeah,
You
so
don't have it growing.
it's lovely to, yeah, it's very, if it's a dewy morning, you see these little dewdrops at every little joint along the needles, as it were. It's just like it has this drying property. You feel it's almost exuding moisture out of every little joint on its stems on those dewy mornings, and it's used. You just make a tea. Well, basically, I think you're supposed to boil it for 20 minutes and then leave it to cool overnight, so you get a fairly thorough extraction of it, and then you need to dilute it a bit to spray it out. But it's intended to be a spray to the soil and holding the moisture where the moisture should stay down in the soil realm and not be coming up round the leaves of the plant. And that's, I mean, round the leaves is what brings the fungus. So it's a helpful one against fungus, but whereas there's conventional silica sprays as a foliar spray for fungus, the 508 is intended more as directing towards the soil than onto the leaves. Is that right, Sue? What do you think? I mean, that's what I
Need to unmute. So
Sorry. Yeah, that's how I understand it as well. Although I mean, once something's growing, I tend to still apply it. I've been putting it on garlic to try and combat the rust.
right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean,
yeah, I mean, then it is, as you say, it's going to go on the plants anyway if you're doing the soil in that region.
yeah, and it's just such an interesting plant because it kind of predates the dinosaurs. It's this ancient fern-like plant that has no fruits or seeds or leaves or anything, and it's kind of this alien plant, but it reproduces from the spores. So I just think the actual plant itself is quite unique and fascinating.
Yes.
And then I guess I'd just add that it has this kind of astringent tightening effect maybe as well. I don't know, like you said, it kind of draws in that moisture. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is quite fern-like, isn't it? Unfortunately, it doesn't grow down here very well, so we don't have oodles of it, but you can buy it from the association so far until Doc spray it all out probably.
yes, that's the problem,
Yeah.
isn't it? Anything that's called a so-called weed suddenly has to be sprayed to death. But in Australia, when because it doesn't grow there very well because it's so dry often, then people used to use the male casuarina, or leaves, I suppose you would call them, from not the female tree, but the male tree, and still make a tea in the same way, boiling it up and saving it. And also, I haven't got it here, but Lynette also had a recipe where you could ferment either the Equisetum or the casuarina.
Certainly in India, where we've used casuarina, we usually make, because it's so easy to collect, making quite a big drum full, putting it in the drum and then cover with water and make a liquid tea. Can't remember. I think we put the preparations, the compost preps in it as well. So you're sort of a liquid manure, but it's the Equisetum, and you dilute it in the usual way with the liquid manure and spray it out. Just a reminder that a few years ago, I was Rachel Rose, the editor of Harvest, asked me to do a series on the compost preparations. So there's 6 articles, which was over 2 years, on these compost preparations. So I mean, I've put them all together as a booklet. In fact, I've got a file with them all on. If anyone would like me to just send it to them, probably on a WhatsApp or email, I could send it to you if you give
Right,
me.
and there was talk. Mark was looking into trying to actually get those printed for, you know, that then you get some money for having done them, but that they could be made available on the website. So, you know, I
Yeah,
think
I'm not sure that they are. They possibly are on the website. I remember being asked about that,
Yeah.
or whether it's an item people buy off the website. I'm not sure.
Well,
But
we'll
just
check it
to
out,
know,
because
yeah.
that would be really valuable, you know, because I mean, you don't remember all these things, and you know, while there's books, of course, that do have a lot about the preparations as well, then you know, we have our very own Rachel here who's put it together, and I remember reading that a few years ago, and it's a wonderful summary of it. So that's
Very
fantastic.
straightforward summary.
Yeah.
And in the first article I did a sort of the big pictures, kind of like how the preparations working together as a set, the compost preparations. And I think I've got this little diagram, which is one of the ones I made from it. But basically you've got the 501 and the silica pole, and you've got the 500, the calcium pole in the soil, and the weaving of the compost preparations in between this polarity above and below, the polarity with the weaving of these 6 compost preparations in between.
Very good, very good. So we'll have to finish. My computer probably will die soon. But in terms of storing the preparations, that's probably a really important thing to talk about, because they need to be stored carefully. So in peat, if we can still get the peat, not so easy these days to find that, but just find on the page just a little picture here that in keeping the peat moist and a sort of dry, cool place is away from Wi-Fi and all of those sorts of things. Or, you know, you can perhaps, you know, do something a little bit like a small cowpat pit, but pop them in there inside a couple of terracotta pots or wine barrels or things like that. So you know, the storage, once you get the preparations from well, the BD Association, or you know, if you've got a local group who makes them, yeah, then storing them is really important to try and keep the life forces. I know they currently come in plastic because that's yeah, we haven't yet come up with any way to send them out in something that will last, you know, and still be affordable. But storing them in glass containers, ideally with a, you know, a cork top rather than a metal lid. Or sometimes you can go to op shops and get terracotta, you know, lovely homemade sort of pottery containers. Sometimes they have a cork top. Yeah, any comments about storing just before we finish, Sue or Rachel?
Yeah, mine are in a place where, well, it's basically my garage, and it's not ideal, but in some ways. But one good thing is that it keeps a very even temperature, because the garage is kind of underground, kind of, because the section's on the slope and that goes into, so the prep box is right against the wall, and it's just it keeps a nice constant temperature, because you don't want, the thing you don't want is any condensation. Well, I keep mine in glass jars, and I guess you won't get that problem if it's unglazed terracotta kept in damp peat. But in the glass jars, you could get condensation inside the jars, and that can get mold on and things. So just keeping them at the same temperature. And so, and I mean, like in India, where it's 30 degrees or something, you can't exactly keep them cool, but what you can do is arrange it so that you're not getting fluctuation of temperature. That's more important than the actual temperature itself.
Any thoughts, Sue? You need to unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, I know Rachel's mentioned before, you know, don't store them, use them. Get them out. But yeah, if you're making them and you've got quantities, then definitely, yeah, that's, you've gone to so much trouble of making them and they're so precious, you actually need to make sure you're checking on them regularly, making sure that, especially with the 500 preparation, that you haven't got a pot full of worms turning it into vermicast. And yeah, and that the actual compost preparations aren't drying out, and if they do, you can add a few drops of rainwater just to moisten them. But yeah, I tend to use the terracotta pots for my preps. You know, it's quite a bit colder down here, so yeah, maybe that's the difference. But yeah, no, that's pretty much, yeah, what I would say too.
Well, thank you, especially so, and Rachel, that was fantastic. And Simon, you've added some great things in there as well. So Caitlin, you've got lots of homework now, dear. Was that helpful? I mean, it's possibly a little bit overwhelming in a way, but knowing that you can go in and listen to this again or watch it again or whatever on the website, and get Rachel's book and look up other sort of spaces. Was that helpful to have all of that overview and why they're made the way they are?
Yeah, definitely. I took lots of notes. It was very good. I loved hearing about it, especially the soil element. So good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well,
Just
thank you for
quickly,
being here, Caitlin, and yeah. Good.
And Marion, anything helpful to take away from that?
Yeah, thank you. I very really enjoyed that. I don't know, I didn't have the awareness of how much it involves to make the preparation. So we made the compost with you, but actually now I can see, yeah, what's involved really on a much bigger scale, I guess. It's not only the day of making the compost, but it's all the preparation that have been incorporated before. It's amazing. Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of it, is that sort of interconnectedness that we learn about the other realms and about when to harvest things and how to dry them, and so there's so much involved, and it just it develops your own sort of organ of perception, if you like. So it's a beautiful thing to get into your journey later on. But to start with, it's easier just to buy them from the association, so you don't feel that you've got to go out and start finding a skull or something like that. So
Yeah, and I mean, for me, that's my main motivation for making my own preparations, because got Chris Hull just a couple of kilometers away. I could get them easily from him or whatever, but it's just this living with these plants, growing in your own garden outside the door, harvesting them, the feel of your fingers, harvesting the different sorts of flowers, and making and dealing with those actual animal organs, and just how did Rudolf Steiner kind of come to these giving those preparations as he did, and it's just living with it, and you know, you do pick up a few things about the nature of those plants and the animal parts, and just start to come to a bit more understanding of it. And then I being a star watcher of these years, it's just like, that's the question too I live with, is the qualities of the planets as they move, and that relationship to those plants and animal parts. So yeah, it's just that observation and observation again.
Yeah, and being part of that very big picture, you know, that it's not just one, we're not just doing something here. Everything we do, you know, there's many moving parts, and you start to become aware of that interconnectedness, and that whole closed farm system starts to really make sense, even if it is just a few pots in a garden, you know, and paying attention to these individualities, really, whether they're plants or animals or birds or the wind or the water or whatever, and building that relationship. So it takes you eventually, if it hasn't already, to that sort of more cosmic activity. And you know, we are a walking, living, breathing cosmos ourselves, so it's a possibility to understand ourselves, isn't it? Deborah, do you want any comment about tonight, in anything helpful?
Well, I'm very grateful, because I'm always wanting extra deepening of the knowledge that you have, and I think this is great again, because it's gives the big picture. You know, you can learn about them individually, but every time it's being brought together, like as the big picture, it's it just, that connectedness happens. And yeah, I know I've done I've done with Rachel, I've done nettle in the 500 in the, that's all we've done, haven't we? Yeah, but I want to do the others, because there's that connectedness that happens between yourself and the growing of the plants, which I'm trying to collect at the moment to make some more preparations in it, even though I'm so grateful to be able to get the preparations, but I'm even more excited about the possibilities of having them on the land. It's that thing when you make it, I think yourself, you just, that connectedness goes from when you're making it to the application. And I just looking forward to having that with the other preparations. Yeah, I just have to get a little bit of help from Rachel, and yeah, we shall get. Yes, Rachel.
Yes, and that's all fun to do. It's good.
Yeah. So I think you've got to do it in layers, though, because to start with, I thought, you know, in my nature, I want to have them all. I want to have them all now. I want to get them all in there. But then I realised, no, you can't do that. You've just got to take it in stages and do the easier ones. And then as you grow, that grows as well. So I'm ready.
Oh. Simon, any comments that you'd like to make?
Oh no, this has been really good. It's, for me, it's a little bit of a shame that we didn't have more people attend tonight, but we've all learnt from one another, even the ones that understand the preps, so it's all good.
Yes,
That book I've been reading lately, Christine, the Biodynamic Preparations, is actually really intriguing, because it just expands. So it's Manfred Klett, he just expands Rudolf Steiner's reasoning pretty much, and speaks about the plant and also the animal condition and the reason for the animal parts. But I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who's only just starting out with biodynamics.
I was going to say, so that for more experienced people, there we go. But sometimes all of this can be quite overwhelming, and that's where, you know, being able to just buy these little packages through the BD Association, and then you can put them in your, you know, have a go making a compost, or have a go making a cowpat pit, or make a seaweed tea and pop them in, you know, so that they can do their work. That there's lots of ways that they can be utilised, and you can start to get to know them. So thank you, everyone, for turning up.
Geeta's,
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 yep.
Yes.
I think the association supply that booklet, don't they? So there's the biodynamic preps, and then using and understanding the biodynamic preps. So her books are very insightful
Cool.
as well.
So we've got lots of, you know, resources there to help, you know, when you're sitting out tomorrow, if it's not raining, having a look at your dandelions or your yarrow or your chamomile, going, what was that about that again? Then you can go and you can look up. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.
Yes, well, thank you, everyone.